Open our hearts and minds so that we may be able to hear what you have prepared for us this morning, Lord. May we be vessels that are only receiving what you are imparting, Lord. I pray these things in Jesus' name. Amen. Well, I had a conversation with somebody recently about starting new habits. If I know it's not January, but I'm telling you, New Year's resolutions, new habits are always such a challenge for us when we decide we want to make changes. The person got some bad news about from the doctors, and they found out that they were going to have to cut out sugar. They were going to have to exercise every day. And like pastor, it's just going to be. It's going to be rough. It's going to be hard. We tend to struggle with implementing new habits, but we struggle really hard with breaking bad habits, don't we? But new habits take a lot of time. It takes more than good intentions, unfortunately. I would love to be able to change my habits with good intentions. Oh man, that'd be so easy. I want to change and boom, I change. But it honestly takes intentionality. It honestly takes consistency. A new habit takes about 3 to 4 weeks of consistent application in order to solidify it, to make it stick. If you do it for a week and you break and you stop for a little bit and then you try again, a lot of times that means you're starting all the way over. You have to start back at square one and go for 3 more weeks, because it takes a lot to ingrain that habit into our mind. And a bad habit can be even harder to break. It's like, as tough as it is to start a new habit, start a good new habit, it's even harder to break a bad habit, because you could go for years not doing a bad habit, and guess what? You mess up, and then you're back in the struggle all over again, and you're having to face it all over again, like if you never stopped. And it's such a challenge. But there's a saying that goes, the problem is not the problem. The problem is how we think about the problem. You ever hear that? The problem is not the problem is how we think about the problem. When we change not just what we do, but how we think about what we do, it makes it a lot easier to change our habits than when we're just trying to force ourselves to do something different. It makes a difference when you're trying to wake up early and you're sitting there like, oh, it's 6 o'clock in the morning and I have to be up, and this is horrible. Why would anybody make me do this? And then you have people who find themselves awake at 3 o'clock in the morning, and so like, oh, that's 3 hours late. You're waking up with the regular folk. That's not early. 3 o'clock is early. But I'm telling you, for some people, it's like, oh, I have to wake up at 6, and they even put the alarm the night before, thinking, oh, this is going to be the most horrible morning that I'm going to have to deal with, having to wake up the next day at 6 o'clock. Does that make it easier or harder to wake up at 6 when we think that way? It makes it harder. You anticipate it with this heavy attitude of, oh, no, it's going to be horrible. It makes it impossible for us to overcome for us to implement those good habits. And then when we treat the bad habits like they're amazing and we can't live without it makes it harder too. So you have somebody who's saying, well, I got to give up caffeine. I'm going to give up caffeine. I'm not going to drink any caffeine because it's bad for me. But they wake up and they're thinking, you know what I could use right now? Just a little bit of coffee, just a little bit of coffee. And they start to glorify that bad habit, and they start to think, oh, my life would just be so much better if I could just have a little bit of caffeine, just a sip. And then they kind of say, okay, well, I'm going to go ahead and make just a little bit, and I'll just drink a sip and then I'll be fine. And then before you know it, they've drank 2 or 3 cups and but the problem is not that that coffee is so hard to give up, is that attitude about it is bad. And you kind of put yourself in a bad situation when you're glorifying this bad habit and you're making it so beautiful. How much harder is it to give up coffee if all you think about is how amazing coffee is, how wonderful it is, and how much of a difference it makes in your day? It's going to be tough to give it up. So our attitude, our paradigm is often what makes things so hard to change. It takes a paradigm shift, a change in our mentality. When we're talking about a paradigm shift, we're not talking about positive thinking. We're talking about reconstructed thinking. We're talking about changing the way that we think about things. It's a cultural shift. It's a reconstruction of priorities, of values. It is a reconstruction of our hearts. Frank Outlaw, who was the CEO of Lowe's, no, not Lowe's, Bi-Lo. He was the CEO of Bi-Lo. He said, watch your thoughts. They become words. By the way, that's in your study guide, so write it down. Watch your thoughts. They become words. Watch your words. They become actions. Watch your actions. They become habits. Watch your habits. They become character. Watch your character, for it becomes your destiny. It becomes your destiny. So I guess it's chicken or egg time, right? It's chicken or egg. Let's figure it out. Do our thoughts affect our character, or does our character affect our thoughts? Is it the chicken or the egg? Oh, good answer. Do I think the way I do because of my paradigm, or is my paradigm a result of my thoughts? And the truth is that our character or our paradigm affects the way we see things, and the way we think affects our paradigm. You know, because of our culture, because of our upbringing, because of our personality, we see the world a certain way, and we think a certain way. We have a culture that is ingrained in our minds that make us view the world in a certain light. We have a personality that makes us see the world with different eyes. But because of the way we think, we can develop our paradigm. If we change our thoughts, it changes our outlook on the world, doesn't it? If we change what we think, it changes the way that we see other people. But that's exactly what traps us sometimes. We try to change our thoughts, but our paradigm is stuck. I say, I'm going to be a positive person, but my outlook is negative. How can I change my positive thoughts if my paradigm, if the way I interpret the world and the way I think is driven by negativity? And then we say, well, I'm going to change my paradigm. I'm going to change the way I see the world, but every single thought is opposite to what we're trying to do. We don't change our thought. We try to change one or the other. And the truth is we get stuck in both because we need to change the way we think, and we need to change our thoughts, and we need to have a revolution of our mind, a reconstruction of our heart in order to find true success in our change. No wonder we get so frustrated because we try to change our thoughts or our outlook, and we get stuck in both. When we find ourselves in that predicament, we should follow the example of David, the psalmist, in Psalm 51, verse 10. And I'll have it on the screen so that we can see it together. 51:10, it says, "Create in me a clean heart, O God, and renew a right spirit within me. when we think about our paradigm, we tend to talk about what we think, right? It's our thoughts. Our paradigm is our logic, it's our reason. But our thoughts are driven by two things, two different engines that power our paradigm. Our intellect, which is what we think we know, and our desires, which is what we feel. So our paradigm is being driven by facts and feelings, And oftentimes, it's not the facts that are setting the direction of our hearts, it's our feelings that are setting the direction of our hearts. The problem with paradigm is that we all hope that it's more driven by logic and intellect, when it's really driven by how we feel, by our emotions. Not to get into politics, but this is why you have such passionate arguments. You ever see this? I stopped talking politics because it doesn't matter. It is like fighting for no reason. It's just like fighting for the sake of fighting, because it's not logic driven, it's emotions driven, it's paradigm driven. And so it's like you see two people looking the same thing, but they're not looking at the facts, they're looking at it with how they feel. And so you start to have arguments that aren't based on anything on paper, it's based on emotions. And so it kind of ends up being a bloody battle of who cares the most. We're becoming a heart-dominated culture. We're becoming a culture that's dominated by how I feel, by how I interpret things, by my paradigm. But my paradigm is driven by my emotions, not by my logic, not by what I understand, but by what I feel. We're starting to experience a society where facts are completely irrelevant. It's irrelevant. It doesn't matter what the fact is. It only matters how I feel about the facts. Where God's word is second to our own impressions. Do you hear me, brothers and sisters? Where we're driven not by the facts of the Bible, but by how we interpret things in the Bible. We attempt to use human logic to understand godly things. And we change our minds. We're quick to change our minds, ever changing our hearts. But it's impossible. It is impossible to please God by changing our minds or even by changing our actions. We cannot please God by changing logic or changing our actions. Only by reconstructing our hearts do we please God. What God desires is a surrendered heart, a surrendered will, a reconstructed heart. Not reconstructed, brothers and sisters, by how we feel or how we see fit, but reconstructed by God Himself. Amen. God's goal has never been to share fun facts with us. Every time He teaches us something, it is with the direct goal of changing our hearts. Every command in the Bible, every detail was valuable for transforming the heart. We struggle in trying to make God fit our paradigm, fit our way of thinking, instead of fitting His way of thinking. While we are scratching our heads and trying to comprehend God, He is trying to get us to change the way we think altogether. Not make sense of God, change the way we think about God. Change the way our hearts view the world, change our paradigms. While Jesus seems to say things that contradict logic, what He's really trying to do is contradict our selfish, broken paradigms. That's what He's contradicting. He's not contradicting logic. He's contradicting our broken hearts. We see this at the Mount of Blessings. In case you didn't see this yet, this is actually the original Mount of Blessings. It's called Mount Gerizim. The original, it was in the valley of Shechem, and there God shared the conditions for the covenant he was making with Israel. The priests would stand on both sides of the valley. They stood on Mount and Mount Gerizim, and they shouted to the people the blessings that they could expect when they obeyed God. But they also shouted the curses that came with disobeying God. So they were hearing, Israel was hearing blessing after blessing after blessing. If you obey me, this is what I'm going to do to bless you. But, and we don't like but, we don't like the second part. We say, give me showers of blessings. And God says, if you accept this blessing, you must also accept the consequences for disobeying. And these Israelites were showered with blessings, but there were conditions. There was a curse for not obeying. And so we see that God was not trying to change Israel's patterns of action. He wasn't trying to change what they did on Sabbath. He wasn't trying to change what practices they had. He was trying to change their hearts. By asking them to submit to his commands and letting him change the way they think, he was attempting to reconstruct their selfish and sin-filled hearts. He told them all about the wonderful things they could expect if they were to surrender to him. And so they called this mountain the Mount of Blessings, but Israel missed out. They missed it. We forget that there's two extremes. There's two opposite sides to disobeying God. There's one where we disobey God completely, where we say, you know what? I'm going to do things my way, the way I see fit, the way I want to do it, and hopefully God will bless me anyways. And there's the other extreme where we focus so much on our actions and we never change our hearts. Israel rejoiced at the covenant, and they disobeyed God's every single command. Every step of the way, they were disobedient. And when they were tired of the curses, they forced everyone by hand, by force, to obey to an extreme, to the other edge. Instead of saying, okay, God doesn't want you to cross this line, but you guys can't even cross that line, because if you cross that line, you'll cross this line, and before you know it, you're going to be in sin. So they created these hedge of protection around the laws of God that took away from the heart and only put it in our hands. Their hearts remained selfish, corrupted, and even though they changed their actions, their hearts never changed. So Gerizim lost its distinction as the Mount of Blessings, and was replaced by a mountain that was unnamed in the Bible, by the Sea of Galilee. Jesus had recently begun his ministry, and already he had multitudes following him. We don't realize the timing of the Gospels and how quick Jesus went from being baptized, going through the 40 days in the wilderness, and then all of a sudden, he comes out with power, with authority given to him by his Father. And he does amazing things, and multitudes start to follow him. He had already chosen his disciples. He had gone and village by village, healing people, changing people, ministering to their needs. He mingled with them, and he earned the right to speak to them as a teacher. He didn't just come and preach. He spent time ministering to them, helping them. He gained their confidence. And then after that is when he gathered the people to speak to them. While they were eager to listen to Jesus, they were stuck in their old paradigm. They got stuck in that mentality. Their old hearts were determined to overthrow their oppressors. They were still focused on serving God with their actions instead of their hearts. They still valued respect and honor above love and mercy. Respect and honor over love and mercy. To them, it was more important to be feared than admired. They got stuck. They got stuck. And so Jesus gives them a lesson, not to change their thinking, but to change their entire way of thinking, to reconstruct their hearts, to change their paradigm, but to change the deepest inkling of their souls. And we find this teaching in Matthew chapter 5. Turn with me to Matthew chapter 5, and we'll read it together. Starting in verse 1, chapter 5, verse 1. And it reads, "Seeing the crowds, he went up on the mountain, and when he sat down, his disciples came to him. And he opened his mouth and taught them, saying, Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they shall be satisfied. Blessed are the merciful, for they shall receive mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called sons of God. Blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are you when others revile you and persecute you and utter all kinds of evil against you falsely on my account. Rejoice and be glad, for your reward is great in heaven. For so they persecuted the prophets who were before you." So you see that Jesus quietly contradicts everything that those people had ever been taught. Everything that they had been taught. Some preachers, they like to come in and shock and awe. They're like, all right, let me get your attention. All right, let's go and throw a smoke bomb, and then I'll come in flying, and I'll say, Jesus doesn't love everybody. And everybody like, what? And then I'll say, no, he loves everybody, but he doesn't bless everybody. And everybody's like, oh, and they start to think, oh man, that's so crazy. That's such a weird way of thinking. And all their attention is fixated. And basically it's just a show that I'm trying to get people's attention. It has nothing to do with truth. But Jesus didn't throw bombs to get to get attention. He changed the ways people think. He wasn't trying to get everybody to look at him so he can explain further. He wanted to change the way they thought about things. So he said things that were opposite so that they could change their paradigm, the way they thought about life, the way they thought about God, the way they thought about what's important, what matters. Major shifts in paradigm that Jesus is trying to lead us to in this passage. He is attempting not to get our attention like, oh, wow, you're telling me the poor are blessed. No, he's like, I want you to think differently about poverty. I want you to think differently about what it means to be blessed, what it means to be part of God's kingdom. Not about money, but about value. He wanted to reconstruct our hearts through these teachings. And so he gives us this bomb, and he keeps us there because he wants us, our paradigm, our hearts to be reconstructed. So the first paradigm shift is that there's more to this life than what we can see. There's more to it than what you're looking at. We like to judge a book by its cover. And everybody has warned us against this, haven't they? You hear it all the time. Don't judge a book by its cover. And then we keep judging books by their covers. In spite of all the warnings, we do this all the time. We always see circumstances for what they are, not what they could be, not what God has made them to be. So we say being poor is bad. Mourning is bad. Being poor in spirit is bad. Being weak is bad. It's all bad. How can any of these things be good? There's no second layers. To the people listening, there was no blessing in going through tough experiences. That's it. There's nothing there. How can someone who is mourning be happy and be blessed? That doesn't make sense unless we learn to view this life in light of a relationship with God, in light of what things can be when we have a relationship with God. Brothers and sisters, God is always good. Not some of the time, not when things are good. God is always good. He is our strength in our greatest weakness. He is our comforter in our deepest sorrow. God is always good. And sometimes God even blesses us through tough experiences. A person who has never had any challenges or had to work hard for anything in their life, are they usually better off for that? You see a kid who their mom never made them do anything hard, never made them work, never made them take responsibility for their action. Are they better off? No, they're weak. And sometimes God challenges us and pushes us. Not everything that's bad is bad for us. We need to change our paradigm and stop looking at things at face value. Sometimes a bad experience is what we need to make us a better person. And sometimes a golden opportunity is directly from Satan to cause us harm. Not everything good is from God, and not everything bad is from Satan. We have to learn to look at things with different eyes, with spiritual focus. We have to reconstruct our heart to learn to see things more than just at face value. We are blessed when we surrender to God. When our hearts are transformed, we stop looking at things the way we used to look. By understanding this truth, our hearts learn to lean on God for understanding instead of judging things by our own standards of excellence. We can be blessed in spite of how things look. That is how Jesus wants us to think. That is what Jesus wants us to change about our way of thinking. That is how Jesus wants to reconstruct our hearts. The next paradigm shift Jesus wants us to make is for us to change what we value. We tend to maintain a worldly value system even after we become Christians. It's like Christianity doesn't change the way we look at the world. How ridiculous is that we can be Christians, that we can know the love of Christ and still think like we used to think before? It's ridiculous. But we tend to value the things the world values instead of what God values. Money still seems to be one of our biggest priorities. We justify our actions. We make compromises that we shouldn't be making. And we still care more about how people admire us than whether we're faithful to God. All those things that seem to be so important to us never changes, even after we become Christians, for a long time. But Jesus wanted us to reorganize our values. There are more important things than money, brothers and sisters. There are more important things in the world. It is better to be dirt poor and right with God than for us to be billionaires far from Him. And while there are many Christian billionaires, the challenge is not valuing money more than our right relationship with God. There are more important things than admiration. It was my first year of school, I had a bit of a challenge with realizing. I'll put it broadly. I had been home until the first grade, and I had lots of friends. I was friends with the kids at church. I was friends with the kids in my neighborhood. And when we hung out, we just played until I felt like it. And and my mom was teaching me my ABCs and my 1, 2, 3s. It was great. So then when I got to the school, and all of a sudden there's 30 kids, and teacher isn't paying attention to me, and the kids are mean to me, it's like, wait a second, this is hard to wrap my mind around. So I acted out to get their attention. I would do silly, bad things that obviously, you learn after a while that it actually makes it worse for you. People pay you less attention, and they start to think of you negatively when you do those things. And I learned that some people are never going to like you, and there's nothing you can do about it. That's a tough lesson to learn, that you can love people as much as you can, and there's people that will still not love you back. I learned that there are things that are more valuable than the admiration of my peers. Jesus wants us to value our relationship with him above any other relationship. Even when we're persecuted, even when we're ridiculed, there are more important things than admiration. There's more important things than glory. Meekness is not a positive character trait in our society. No one is like, oh, hire that person. They're the meekest person in the room. Nobody wants a meek employee. But a lack of meekness usually means a strong self-focus. It usually means an unhealthy drive to do things that don't matter. It doesn't matter to be glorified. It only matters to glorify God. We need to learn to value the things that God values. We need to change our paradigm about what's important. We must surrender to God so that he can change our thinking about what is valuable and what is vanity. He must reconstruct our hearts. The final paradigm shift, and this is hard for us, is for us to admit that God's wisdom is greater than our own. Everything we think we know is flawed. Everything you think you know is wrong. Selfishness warps reality. Sinfulness taints our vision. We make heavy criticisms of others, and we find excuses for our own behavior. Our desires are flawed. Our views are limited. We need to surrender to Jesus completely. We need to surrender our way of thinking to him.